Hey guys, Uhuru. This is Maryam Aziz Muhammad. I am the editor in chief here at Eonsa Magazine, and I'm here with my co-host Doniven Hill Bush, and we're here to discuss a few things. But before we open up, before we start the conversation, one of the things that I wanted to say is that I would be amiss to run a publication like this that declares itself to be anti imperialist, anti fascist, run by people who identify as socialists, as communists, as Pan Africanists, as African internationalists. I would be amiss to run a platform like IANSA and not talk about what's going on in this world. So this is our second emergency live stream. The one previously a few weeks ago was on Venezuela, and but now we wanted to talk about ICE and state surveillance because right now a lot of stuff is coming down the pipeline. And honestly, if we don't discuss it, especially with a lot of you guys who are our audience and we consider you comrades, we would be doing you a disservice. And I'm going to give it to my co host and associate editor, Doniven Hill Bush.
Peace, y'all. As you heard, my name is Donovan Hill Bush, and I'm just going to follow up what Maryam said that if we are to, as a Yansa, call ourselves a form of alternative media, media that's alternative from the empire, from the corporate media systems, and from in collaboration with both police and ICE, it would be remiss if we didn't talk about these sort of issues, how all these intersect, and even what to think about as we're continuing the fight against the empire for a more liberated society. So I kind of just want to throw the cat out the bag, excuse me. But literally yesterday morning, news came about of a recent shooting from ICE in Minneapolis, Minnesota, one of multiple shootings that ICE has conducted across the U.S. empire. And for me, this happened to be like quickly sudden. I was just heading over, as some of you may know, I'm currently in Philadelphia, being able to get some Yasif work done with Maryam. And it's for me, it came a little sudden. I was just waking up in the morning, and the first thing I see in the mail is a group of ICE agents tackling and shooting a nurse. So I want to know what your reaction was to the whole video.
So the first thing is, I think it's wildly unfortunate that it took that per, you know. Well, first I was at a loss for words, but then the second thing is, a lot of people were talking about, and I agree, the fact that unfortunately, when ICE has started to kill white civilians, people have really started to pay attention. And of course, it's an atrocity altogether. But, ICE was terrorizing Black and Indigenous communities and has been terrorizing Black and Indigenous communities for quite a while. And I find it rather unfortunate that when a person is, when a white person is killed, finally there's an uproar because I think in a lot of ways, people thought that the empire would never touch them because they're supposed to be, the system was designed for people of European descent. And, people have never understood that what happens to brown people and Black people and indigenous people at home and abroad will eventually happen to everyone because that's how the system is designed. But overall, I thought it was awful. And unfortunately, my main thing, Donovan, is I don't necessarily see it coming to an end. So the primary thing is, you know, something has to be done about it. But this is why we're doing this live stream, because we want to talk about ICE, but we're also wanting to talk about the things that people need to know and think about when they are organizing, such as, like the title says below us, state surveillance. But it's just wild that all of this is happening. Um but like Brother Malcolm said, the chickens are coming home to roost.
It's like its own modernized version of necropolitics. Just seeing how black life and black and brown life in particular is seen as necessary for the U.S. empire to continue going. It's almost as if our bodies are labor. our livelihoods are they need we that we need to be oppressed in order for stuff like ice to exist, in order for society to go to a normalcy, which is a normalcy that doesn't really exist. Saint Trey does an amazing job with this over in Yansa. He published an article just recently. I highly recommend you read it. It's some of the most phenomenal writing I've seen within the past few months. And they highlight how this sort of idea of a normal society, like after all this is said and done, we can just go back to normal. That's never existed. It's never going to exist. The longer we let the United States continue to prosper as the most powerful nation on the globe, the more that events like these are going to continue to just be a part of our everyday experience. There's no normal, there's nothing you can just kick back and relax to, because while you're enjoying the so-called freedoms you have in the United States, there are millions upon millions more people whose blood, sweat, and tears are allowing you to enjoy your comforts. It was only a matter of time before the acts and effects of imperialism come back to hit you at home. It shouldn't take white death for the vast majority of this population to take the issues of ICE, policing, and the continued surveillance from our government, from now and from the past, and to continue on forward. It's the same story with a different script. The chickens come, like Malcolm said, the chickens coming home to roost. They're roosting fantabulously right now, and it seems like people are hopefully now starting to realize that we have to actually continue to fight.
Exactly. And another thing that, so you know what? Let me actually go back and tell you guys what led to this live stream. So this morning, I was sitting down and I was going to record a public service announcement and put it on the Eonsa social media pages. And I was going to talk to people and say that, as in ever, what I said at the beginning of this live stream at the very start a few minutes ago, that I would feel amiss to not tell people these things. So what I did was I sat there and I did like 20 takes on my phone trying to record like a personalized message to our audiences that they need to be very careful on the things they post. They need to be careful of who they organize with. They need to be careful of the actions they carry out. And I couldn't really find a way to say it in a way that was like really going to be pushed to 3 minutes, because I was trying to get it on the reels. That way it could be circulating and then more people, it could come across their explore page. But I was talking to Doniven, and the live stream made a whole lot more sense because we also need to go in depth about these things. And this would be an article, but another thing is visuals like this are important because people don't read anymore. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to go into a few points that I had for a video, a short video, but we're going to just go over them. And the first one we wanted to touch on, and I'm going to let Doniven talk about this in a second, is who you organize with. And right now, like I said, I'm on the ground in Philadelphia. Philadelphia right now has a lot going on in terms of ICE coming down in Philadelphia, but on terms of people trying to organize against ICE, people trying to organize very marginalized and vulnerable communities. And, I know a lot of people, especially a lot of people who want to jump on the cause, who give a damn, they might not do their due diligence and see who they're organizing with because they want to get involved so badly. And I think one of the main things is you have to watch who you organize with, because, we're watching these horrifying videos of ICE gunning people down, execution style, very nasty, very, very hard to watch. And if you're not disciplined, I mean, well, they don't need a reason to harm you already. The state doesn't. So you want to already be extra careful about what you're going to do, because at any given point, you don't want to give them a reason. So you always have to make sure you're on the defense and not the offense, because they're already looking to come after you in the first place.
This might be a small little semantic thing, but always keep in mind that whenever oppressed people resist their oppression, it's always seen as an act of defense. Usually, most of the time, the defense of themselves, their communities, their land, especially. their ability to self-determine. It's always seen arts as defense. A great offense comes from a great defense as well, and that's in to make sure that you can assess the threat and you can make sure that you're not causing harm in the process. Hence why the Panthers at first seemingly were against the Weather Underground and their acts because it's seen as adventurism. And then fast forward day, and you'll have decades of these ideas of revolutionary actions, which come so far as to just being nothing but reactionary. But this is the media that we consume. This is films such as One Battle After Another, not giving a context of why a French 75 needed to be made, no a context to why a black liberation army needed to be made. But when you are continually fed these ideas of revolution just solely being the guns, not to say that people shouldn't arm themselves or defend themselves, but understanding that they had to arm themselves and to again defend themselves, not try to become the people that they're actively trying to liberate themselves from. So when you are fed these oceans of just these out of pocket or barely reasonable reasons for actively gunning down your opposition, is just then broadcast as the only revolutionary act, that the only way that we can revolt is through the guns, because oh, we don't want to give these type of people the guns. Let's throw away the free breakfast programs, the free education, the political education, the community gatherings, the ability to create third spaces, the ability to love, and rather just broadcast this one idea where it's solely about the combat, not knowing why they had to go towards direct action in the first place. So again, not a condemnation of self defense, but understanding that it's this is defense is what it is. It is defense, not to try to be braggadocio or to like satisfy some individual grievance.
Yeah, and with that being said, I was going to say, I know, Donovan, you had a few clips that you wanted to show, and you mentioned One Battle After Another, which we do have something coming out on, I think, in a few weeks, regarding award season and a critique of One Battle After Another. But, apparently, if I'm not mistaken, you said SNL, you were telling me SNL made a skit about ICE.
Just recently, it seemed that SNL made a skit about the current events happening in Minnesota. It may have been, since I saw a clip of it online, but I had it pulled up. I sent it to you. But it may have been focused most the last shooting upon ICE, or it just come out at the perfect time. But this was something I saw online just about a few hours ago. So I can send the clip to the chat, and then we can do a full reaction to it.
I was going to say, if you wanted to share your screen. African People's Socialist Party, sometimes organizing is making a plan of action for a fundraiser. Sometimes organizing is a study group. Sometimes organizing is something small, such as making a document for a meeting we're going to have. revolution doesn't always look like guns a blazing on the street against the opposition. And of course, we understand historically when it comes to revolutions, it does come to that. You know, when we look at the Haitian Revolution, or we look at um, a lot of what has happened in history, of course. People do have guns ablazing, especially as a person of Caribbean descent. You know, in Jamaica, you look at a lot of the history when it came to cutting down the slave masters and taking down colonialism. You know, people had machetes, people had cutlasses, people had all these kinds of weapons, but sometimes revolution, it looks like organizing and planning. And I think people get lost in the guns ablaze because, you know, that's you know how we're going to get freedom, of course, but people also don't really understand like the inner workings of what it takes. Like that's a build up to that moment. That's not the first thing that pops off when these things happen. And that's why we're getting into this kind of a live stream. And another thing is, you know, the topic tonight is ICE organizing and state surveillance. And state surveillance is also super, super important to discuss when organizing against, you know, the powers that be in these situations. Because to be honest, it's quite it's very difficult organizing now compared to back in the day. You know, back in the day, of course, with the Black Panthers, the Black Liberation Army, a lot of organizations, they had ways of organizing that were underground, and a lot of things need to stay underground, to be honest, because you can't show the state your every move. But you know, with it's much harder to stay underground or to plan actions or to do whatever when everything is, you know, you Google something, it's everywhere. You look something up, it's everywhere. You know, even nowadays, I've thought about when you organize with comrades, maybe we should go back to written hand notes, because you text something, God knows the FBI, CIA, don't even get me started on the Mossad. Someone will find your text messages. Someone can find certain things you take pictures of. They go in the cloud. There's a thousand things you can think of. I remember thinking something, and I'm not trying to scare anyone, but I remember wondering if I was losing my mind. I thought of something, and like 5 minutes later, and I didn't Google it, I didn't look it up. I thought of something, and it popped up, and maybe it was a coincidence, but I don't really believe in coincidences. I thought of something, and it popped up on my feed like seconds later, and it was very alarming. So you have to watch out, because the whole time the state is knowing your moves and planning out your moves before you even decide to do something, honestly.
I'll also just add that even in the media we consume, it manufactures, for the old Chomsky phrase, it manufactures our consent and our ability to be okay with this type of hyper surveillance. You see this. I saw a movie recently. It was called The Ring Man, and it was about working class white dude who gets into this game to win a bunch of money to help feed his family. But the game is basically a globalized man, globalized mercenary hunt. And I'm watching the film. It's based off of an old Stephen King novel, and I'm watching the film, and it doesn't feel so far fetched to me when I see the film, because I'm talking to the people I'm in the film with, in the movies with. I'm like, this is already happening, basically. They're like, so this doesn't feel odd to you? Like, no, because they're already doing this. They already know my location just off of my phone being on, or off of a social media post. They're constantly tracking us like every single second of our lives. And so when you put it in the platform of entertainment, then it just becomes a all's fun, good guys hunting spree. Oh, but because we have to have these cameras, because these crazy people, these bad guys, these dangerous people are going to be out there. So we need to have hundreds of different forms of surveillance. And if you see anything suspicious, please comply with the empire that will definitely not do the exact same things to you. So it just gives folks permission to be watched, to have no privacy, to not have a semblance of peace and comfort at times, especially if your goal is to fight against said system, because they'll always find a way, whether it was COINTELPRO of the '60s or the current AI landscape, where they're trying to use AI to commit war crimes and to watch us in our everyday lives. It's all a ploy to make us okay with our own oppression. And the more we're okay with this, with our many forms of oppression, the more that the status quo will continue. And if you're going to organize, it shouldn't be we shouldn't think that the 60s are the 2020s. It's clearly obvious that what we could do both above and underground in the 60s and 70s is not going to happen in the 2020s going into the 2030s. We couldn't even do that in the past decade because they were constantly improving their modes of defense. So when you try to go and commit to direct acts, just know you're going to be watched. And this should harden you. Should prepare you more than ever to strategize and to think beyond your oppressor's capabilities.
One person I think about, Mama Assata Shakur, may she rest in peace. I remember you hear about when she went to Cuba, and one thing that was interesting to me was it when I first really heard that like someone had kept her hidden for like a long time on end before she actually got to Cuba. I think in the surveillance state with the technology of 2025, 2026, would she have been able to really stay hidden? Like, because, I'm thinking, I didn't know what the entire setup was, but I can imagine she was in someone's house, didn't leave for like the hell of a long time. And with everything going now, like, cameras are in places you wouldn't even imagine. There's all kinds of surveillance. Like, would she have been able to stay hidden that long in 2026 and be able to go to Cuba and be over there? But, we'll never know because that happened like 50 years ago. But I think of things like that, like that now. Hopefully her spot might have been blown up in 2026. The way iPhones and technology, you got air tags. I can put an air tag on your car. You're driving. Next thing you know, I know everywhere you're going. But it's a hell of an interesting thing because the 1960s, and when you think about some of the state technology, Donovan, some of this stuff has existed for longer than we have known about it. Now, AI, for example, AI, we've been thinking, because we've been familiar with it for maybe the last 4 or 5, maybe even 6 years, a little bit before the pandemic or beginning, like right at the start of the pandemic. And but the government and everything and the powers that be, AI has probably been around for like if not decades, and who knows what has been AI'd or what has been manufactured to manufacture your or my consent to go and do things. I think of things like the Iraq and Gulf War. Who knows what kind of other, because we already know the government lied about that. Who knows what kind of technology they have been using or they have used or continue to use to make us all believe like the things that they're trying to the wool that they're trying to pull over our eyes.
I'll even add too, what made Sada Shakur's story so important was that she made sure that she was able to stay hidden, that she wasn't trying to flaunt herself as a revolutionary. She didn't make the letters she did or write her autobiography because she wanted to be a celebrity. She wrote it because she understood that she had a mission, and that mission involved a level of discretion that a lot of even our favorite celebrities, anybody involved in social justice, isn't partaking in the same acts. You kind of get where I'm getting at here, where I even have to remind some folks in my inner circles just to turn your phone off and protest. Like this isn't a time to become a celebrity or become an activist celebrity or a celebrity organizer. Like as we've been seeing for at least the past few years, at least at the very least since October 7th, there are serious consequences to opposing the empire. And if you oppose well enough, they will go by any means to find who you are and make sure that you aren't able to oppose them again.
And there, and I'm going to be honest, there's a lot of things even to protect myself that I haven't thought of and I haven't been acting on. The last few months I've been to a few protests, I didn't cover my face. And I see all the, and you know what, I'll give it up to some of our white anarchist comrades. They be the first people out there, full kafia face wrap. And you know what, maybe we need to get like them, full kafia face wrap. Actually, this is gonna be me going on my little what's the word? I don't want to go on a tangent, but there's a video, and I really wish I could remember which Khalid Muhammad speech I'm talking about. Khalid Muhammad, R.I.P. a real one. The truth killer. Well, no, they called him the lie killer. What they called him a few things, but they called Khalid the lie killer, the truth hitman, there was a list of words for him, but I think of a speech that he made, and I believe it was at New York. It was in New York at that famous bookstore that I can't remember, but he was talking about ski masks. And I think about, I'm in Philly, and in Philly they have essentially banned ski masks, or they call them shiesties. If you follow me on Twitter, this is, like I said, Donovan, this is me going off on a tangent. We're going to get back to the point, but I am talking about masking and arming your face against state surveillance, which I'm not very good at, by the way. But he did a video about pulling up on the police and wearing, well, he didn't say shiesties because that was the early 90s. That wasn't a thing. He was talking about rolling up on the opposition in ski masks to protect your identity. But he had said, like, if more brothers and sisters put on ski masks and were, and I'm talking, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he was talking about more people put on ski masks and pull up on the opposition, they would less likely mess with us. And on top of that, if you follow me on Twitter for some time, and a lot of people who of course look at the magazine do, I had an idea, and I called it, this was like from 2 years ago, I called it shiesty theory. And I had noticed between the Irish Republican Army and people in urban guerrilla areas like Philly, Chicago, New York, DC, and people, and of course our brothers and sisters in Palestine, I know face coverings are a form of resistance. And then I think about the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, even those people, some of the people who are fighting against the Shah, they were covered up. And another thing is, it's not just about, I am a Muslim woman. Clearly, I'm not covered right now. But I think about in an area like Philadelphia where we have niqabis and people like that. Even I think about as Muslims, a lot of us have found ways to not necessarily bypass state surveillance, but use our religion to get around it. And I mean, that's for our faith, of course, but that's a great way of, if we're all in, because I think about it, if me and 500 other Black Muslim sisters are in the cabs, you can't see us. Um, but that's a thing that I just wanted to quickly touch on, but masking up against state surveillance when you have actions, when you go and try to do things is very important, because the moment they're able to identify you, they can, God knows what they can do. And then you have face for recognition, AI, cloning. They can go and say that, one of us robbed a bank and have a picture of me holding a weapon or a semi-automatic, and whole time I was at home. They can manufacture all kinds of stuff to manufacture consent.
I mean, you're already seeing the you've already seen last year. I want to say last year, 2024, the Trump resorts of Palestine, where they're now using AI to fantasize their wildest imperialist dreams. So it shouldn't be a surprise. I think recently, at least Instagram was talking about this. There was a video going around of this video of someone, I think, trying to shoplift, and they use like AI black faces and stuff like that as well. I've seen a video earlier today where it's this elderly black woman trying to cook different recipes. So they're manufacturing Aunt Jemimas in 2026. If you don't think that they are going to use the image they see of you online as its own ploy of whether it be to make people consume or to justify state surveillance and just produce more propaganda, then the The blunt truth is the way that the way that we utilize AI now, if it is going to leave, it's not going to leave for a long time. This isn't to say that we should accept the fact that AI exists, but we should come to a critical understanding that whenever that the em- let me make sure, I can backtrack. We need to come to a critical understanding that the empire, when it finds an opportunity to mass produce commodities or ways for us to say propagandize as much as possible, then they're going to go overboard with it. It's not just this one little technology. It's not just, oh, you need to correct this letter so that your sentence makes sense, or you need to do. It's not just Grammarly. They weren't going to end at Grammarly. They're going to end with having AI artists, AI actors, AI movies. It wouldn't be surprised in the next few years if you find a lot of the biggest best-selling hits having to use AI, or their directors and team members being proud of using a technology that is actively cutting the world's water supply, mind you. So this is all they will sacrifice the land that they so conquered, that they so colonized, if it means that they can continue to oppress the people within that land.
Yeah, exactly. And then another thing, but like I said, when I was thinking of this video this morning, when I was originally going to make this a video, there are certain points I wanted to touch on. I mean, we just basically went into mass surveillance, but the other thing is, we had briefly just mentioned this, is you have to make sure you organize with people who know what the hell they are doing. And I know they have all these different fringe groups and different other groups coming out. And I understand people want to get their hands dirty because the state is getting their hands even dirtier. I understand people want to get out there and they want to resist, and I am all for the resistance, but I am all for doing it in a way that is safe. And I think some of the things that I've seen online and have concerned me because, you know, and I'll say I'm new to organizing, mind you. I've read a lot of theory. I've been in different study groups, but in terms of on the ground organizing, I'm rather new. But and I'll say this as a member of the Uhuru movement, with the case of the Uhuru Three, you have people that physically did not carry out any violent action, any insurrectionist anything. They didn't do on January 6th. They didn't go storm the Capitol. Chairman Omali Yeshitela, Penny Hest, and Jesse Neville, they didn't storm the Capitol. They didn't threaten to kill a state representative. They didn't go and physically harm anyone. And they were accused of being provocateurs and Russian agents, and they were state agents, and they were being paid by the Russian government to push propaganda that, by the way, is to liberate the African working class. I guess that's Russian propaganda, right? um, but I think about that, and they raided their houses, and I think about that, and they didn't even do anything besides try to raise money for reparations, or carry out campaigns, or have with the Black is Back coalition, get certain people in office to support the African working class. They didn't do anything physically violent, and they still will kick your door in. The state will kick your door in even if you haven't done anything physically to cause a problem. And so you have to watch with these groups that you organize with, because you have people, they're not doing like me and Donovan were talking about. They're not on the defense, they are on the offense. And they go up to, there's a group, and I'm not going to name any names, but there is a group in Philly. They had weapons, and someone showed me a video of them, like, kind of pulling up on a cop, and they were saying the police officer was parked incorrectly, and they were getting on some kind of really hard confrontation. And I think about that. The cop, if he wanted to, because you know how police use their immunity, I feared for my life, could have killed a bunch of people. Now you got you and your comrades in a literally bloody situation because you wanted to go and do something. And that's another thing. Fringe actions historically have never been really a great idea. And when you look at it, we got even planned things like, and I consider the planning and organizing of slave revolts, for example. That's a form of organizing. When our ancestors were trying to overthrow the plantation and kill mass and get away, that's a form of organizing. And you think of how many slave revolts have failed with organizing and with a plan. So imagine just going to do fringe actions without a plan.
to kind of go back to the Uhuru movement being taken in, be considered Russian agents. Start off with that. There has, and I want to shout out Dr. Sharice Burton Stelly in her book Black Scare, Red Scare, because she touches on how white supremacy within the United States will come up with these ideas of black folks not even being able to organize. The idea of black people wanting freedom was seen as a mental illness for some time. So this idea of black radicals coming in to organize for the freedom, whether it be burning down a plantation, whether it be running drives for reparations, whether it be organizing on the street, free food, free education. The idea of us organizing against the system, creating alternative networks for self-determination for black communities is seen as something that's almost an impossibility for a lot of them. Or if we were to, so in order to justify, oh, why are the bad blacks aren't or why aren't they getting in line like all the other blacks do? Why don't they try to do what we want? Why can't they just assimilate into the empire? So they have to justify it now, or back a few years ago with the Uhuru movement, just like they did with the black communists of the early to mid 1900s during the McCarthy era and the multiple Red Scares. They have to say that, oh, it was a Russian ploy of getting these blacks to try and take over the country. When it's black folks being self-determined as we usually are, trying to fight for our freedom and liberation, organizing amongst ourselves to take down the U.S. empire. At least and I quote, these are the ancestors that many of the folks that say that this isn't our fight or we're not our ancestors. Yeah, a lot of y'all are more than likely not the folks that we're talking about here, who had to go through the Red Scare. Mind you, some of them weren't even communists. They were just black people who just didn't fuck with the system, so they had to organize amongst each other. But it seemed that a lot of us don't really want to be free, that we don't want to be liberated. We want a better empire. And I think that's the major through line issue that we're talking about, whether it be ICE and black folks joining ICE, black and brown people joining ICE and actively kidnapping their own people. Mind you, kidnapping people as kids as young as 5 years old, and the state surveillance that allows them to do so to the point where even your door hand be its own unique surveillance. It's black folks who are joining these groups, these who actively kidnap their own people. It's tragic.
But another thing I wanted to talk about, well, not another thing, but this is a continuation. We were just talking about, because I wanted to say that we're going to show some of the articles about organizing that Doniven has linked. But it's insane when you really look at it, how bad state repression is. And I think you know, a lot of people will not realize how bad things are until it's too late. The entire dystopia, and me and Donovan, and behind the scenes, while you've been hanging out with me, we've been talking about this. um People don't realize that the dystopian Hunger Games, Divergent, Little World, and I'm talking about for people who read these little dystopian novels, we are like in that right now. It's not a thing where it's like a ways away. No, the things that you read about that are Hunger Games esque, that are, very, very hard to think about, those things are happening now. Countless atrocities are happening now. And people think this is a thing where we're somehow, people think things are starting to look grim. No, things have been grim for a while, and it's now becoming so apparent, that now people really can't deny it. But I know Donovan linked a few clips, and one of them I wanted to see. Did you want to share the Turtle Island Liberation Front from Black Agenda Report?
I can do that. Give me just a quick moment. I can pull it up on the screen. And for those who are wondering what the Turtle Island Liberation Front,
I think think Donovan's undergoing some technical difficulties, so I'm gonna give him a second to come back. What I'm gonna do right now, guys, is I'm gonna share the screen, and I'm gonna wait till he comes back, but I'm gonna share the screen for now so we can go through this. All right, so the Turtle Island Liberation Front warning for Africans. So what we've been talking about and discussing essentially is you know and this is an article from Black Agenda Report. This is from December 2025. But what we've been talking about, it's it, you I think one of the first things we need to talk about is that Trump put out that entire plan and agenda, with everything going on in terms of getting weaponizing the left, dismantling the left, really labeling the net left, him and Cash Patel as a terrorist organization. They've been trying to, and even this even applies to me in the Uhuru movement. They've been in a really bad fight to attempt to criminalize and stop in a lot of ways. Oh, I think okay. Wait a second, he's back.
Can I be seen and heard clearly now?
Right.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And so, yes, this is a group that the FBI Director Kash Patel brought up. They're basically trying to create, again, going back to manufacturing consent. They want to manufacture consent against any radical resistance group. You don't even have to be direct act. You don't have to be a form of it'd be an underground movement or any of that nature. But if they can make you go against the extremes of radical leftist, socialist, communist groups, then they can make you go against the most moderate or even the most reformist of different groups. So if they can get you against the Turtle Island Liberation Front, they can definitely get you to um, be against even your local Democratic Socialists of America or something along those lines as well. Um, as they as they say. In Florida, the Liberty City 7 also founded its way of an informant in 2006. So it talks about the history of, well, a continued utilization of COINTELPRO tactics going past the 70s and the 80s as well. As just as they explain later further down the article, they talk about political assassinations like any murder, like any murder, are illegal and so over the government for obvious reasons. But mostly, Bondi has produced a list of rights that are allegedly protected by the First Amendment. They say they are told that they have the right to hold the opinions of our choice regarding law enforcement. We have the right to oppose capitalism or Christianity or any other religion. As for anti-Americanism, we can also have any opinion we want about this country or its government. Trump wants obedience and has created a definition of domestic terrorism that applies to millions of people in this country. Like I was saying, you can go from your most extreme socialist or communist to your most reformist liberal, and they can just be thrown in with a Turtle Island Liberation Group or just be labeled, whether it be communist, radical, anarchist, and that's just enough for folks to go against the empire. Or excuse me, for folks to arrest folks who are going against the empire.
And I wish I had found this for the live stream, but like I said, Trump put out that ordinance back in, what was it, November or October, or essentially cracking down on like these groups. Which is, first of all, it's crazy that his people tried to literally overthrow the government, and he's worried about like quote unquote Antifa, anti-imperialist, because during January 6th, it wasn't leftists, quote unquote leftists, storming the Capitol. It was people who were hard right wingers. But what's interesting though is he put out this ordinance, and maybe I should pull it up at some point, essentially criminalizing, the work that even an organization like Iansa might do. Iansa, and I think about when Charlie Kirk died in September, and within like 72 hours, between 48 and 72 hours of his death, we had put out two articles kind of like talking about maybe this isn't a person you should mourn. He was kind of not kind of, well, he was a fascist, he was a racist, he was everything colonialism and white nationalism stands for. And that was at a time where they were literally raiding people and not kicking people's doors down, well, to some degree, but this is a time where they were essentially going, and people were losing their jobs and people were losing their livelihoods over saying like fuck Charlie Kirk. And I think about even an organization like Iansa under some of these ordinances, you know so, for example, I'm in the Uhuru movement. Doniven's in the Black Alliance for Peace. Some of us are in different organizations who are on staff here at IANSA. And even that work, even if it's not necessarily the most extreme work, it can immediately be criminalized under some of these new kind of policies that this administration is pushing for. And that's why you have to be careful who you're organizing with, because either way they're looking to destroy and criminalize the things we do. So you can't necessarily be with these groups that are looking to automatically get in people's faces. They out on the street carrying semi-automatics and AKs and different things, because that will be used. And I hate to say it, provocateurs, some of the stuff that's happening is going to be used to manufacture consent. And I'm not going to lie, I'm at a place in my mind at this point where in Philly, it's not necessarily a matter of if something is going to happen. It might be a matter of fact of when something is going to happen. And the state will use that as a means to say, we can go, especially in all these Black and brown and indigenous neighborhoods, and we can harm people. And, for years they've had like stop and frisk in a lot of places around the country, which very much criminalizes Black men. And I think about that, like they already had that without any crazy atrocities happening. So imagine what they could do. And I mean, things have happened over the past, but what they could do with just, give them an inch and they'll take a mile.
Something I want to also keep in mind with folks too is that when we say to not say to be careful of provocateurs, or just put it bluntly, feds, we're not saying that we shouldn't go up against a group that will confront the opposition, that will confront oppressive conditions, because that's something that even I have personally dealt with before I even joined the Black Alliance for Peace. Um, one of the major obstacles I had younger when I was in undergrad and trying to organize was the study. I'm like, okay, we read the theory, we have discussed it as a group, we've gotten people on board. Why aren't we actively fighting against these current systems? Even if it's just some of us showing up to counter protest, like that is enough. If we know how to take care of each other, we have all the supplies we need, we can do this. This again, this isn't to say that we should, this isn't to say that we want to have you go with groups that aren't confrontational, because they may be just as as much of a hindrance to the liberation struggle as those who are actively trying to only look for confrontation, not to organize, not to find ways to defend the communities, but to actively make things much worse. I'm seeing that Maryam also pulled some pretty necessary data. One, talk about this here on defining the domestic terrorism threat. So just understanding how the empire sees anybody who creates stuff against its own existence.
Yeah, so what I have here is for sure, definitely because I remember we were talking about the memo right now. Um, and so what I pulled it up and I got it on PDF, and I just want to not go over this whole thing because we don't want to spend it the entire rest of the time, but look at some of this language. In general terms, domestic terrorism is criminal conduct that occurs primarily inside the territory of the United States, and that involves dangerous acts to human life that appear to be intended to intimidate a civilian population. and too long, rampant criminal conduct rising to the level of domestic terrorism, e.g., organized doxing of law enforcement, mass rioting and destruction of our cities, violent efforts to shut down immigration enforcement, targeting of public officials and other political actors has been tolerated. For some culpable actors, such as the certain Antifa aligned extremists, their animating principle is adherence to the types of extreme viewpoints on immigration, radical gender ideology, and anti American sentiment listed below, with a willingness to use violence against law abiding citizenry to serve those beliefs. So, one thing I want to mention already is I know with ICE agents literally taking people's lives, people have been doxing ICE agents. People have been putting things online like this is such and such, he lives at this address, even that, like, and that's not necessarily, that's not going out and attacking and harming someone physically, but look how even just sharing the information of a murderer can be considered like as a terrorist act, mind you. Like, let's say I go out and the ICE agent that killed that person in Minneapolis, let's say I find their information and publicly blast it, that would get me labeled as a terrorist. That's a bit crazy, and that person literally murdered, and or I mean, I don't know if we can say murdered, YouTube unalived someone. And it's kind of jarring that that gets me labeled as a terrorist, but you going out and murdering civilians is not, like, that's not a terroristic act, and you doing it in mass swarms, just going out and hunting people down. That's just, you know the word I'm looking for. That is bewildering.
It's ironic. We talked about this before, even live stream. A lot of how the oppressor explains the oppressed and or the so-called opposition are basically projections of themselves. They talk about extremists, they talk about doxers, they talk about people who are trying to expose identities. Who better at constantly surveilling its citizens, doxing the names of different activists to the right people, and performing this not surprising, but a tragically powerful forms of imperialist extremism, quite like the United States. Every single way that the United States will describe its its biggest ops, whether it's China or Russia, or how it's going to develop rhetoric around the Sahel states. They're projections of how it already treats its own people. But because it's in the red, white, and blue, the 50 stars and 13 stripes, and it has that nice American pie as on alongside of it, then it's just okay. Because although we are just bad, we're nowhere near as bad or as strict or as rights refusing as a China or as any of the communist countries, as a Venezuela, who, by the way, they recently just bombed. We just talked about this upstream. So it's a mix. It's a tragic, ironic joke of an empire, because in every way that it tries to demean us, it's only further justifying its continued downfall.
And you know what's crazy? So let's go through a little bit more of this document. Like I said, we're not going through the whole thing, but look at this. Particularly dangerous are those acts committed by violent extremist groups that threaten both citizen safety and our country's ability to self-govern. These domestic terrorists use violence or the threat of violence to advance political and social agendas, which is ironic because January 6th was, to push a political and social agenda. But it says, including opposition to law and immigration enforcement, extreme views in favor of mass migration and open borders, adherence to radical gender ideology, anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, or anti-Christianity, support for the overthrow of the United States government, hostility towards traditional views on family, religion, and morality, and an elevation of violence to achieve political outcomes, such as political assassinations. The recent attacks fueled by these agendas and ideological frameworks require a robust response. The JTTFs shall prioritize the investigation of such conduct. So, another thing about that, look at some of this language: anti Americanism, anti capitalism, anti Christianity. So, let's talk about Eonsa magazine, dedicated to She Who Dances in the Sky with the Wind. We're already in favor kind of anti-Americanism and anti-capitalism. And you think about it, they're talking about violent extremist groups and they're talking about this. And I think about it, when you look at some of these organizations, it's labeled as like a terrorist group. And I thought about it, and I'm not trying to crack any jokes. I think about the fact that I started a magazine, right? Built on anti-capitalism, anti-imperialism, anti-fascism, right? I got 7 people working under me right now. So there's a group of 8 of us. So in a lot of ways, I'm the leader of a terrorist organization. Oh God. Oh wow. And my name is Maryam Azeeza Muhammad. You couldn't have it any other way, guys. Welcome to Black Radical Islamic Jihad, guys. This is what we're on right now. We on some radical African internationalist jihadi type stuff. But but in all seriousness, it's very concerning how we're publishing every single week at this point. We just got off a break, but every single week we're publishing articles that are anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist in nature. So in the eyes of the government, we're essentially publishing like in the words of Absol, terrorist threats. And then look at that last sentence: the recent attacks fueled by these agendas and ideological frameworks require a robust response. And look at what's going on right now. What do you think a robust response looks like? It definitely doesn't look like just a slap on the wrist. It looks like everything going on now. It looks like ICE knocking down your door, but it also looks like the FBI and other groups trying to make it so you can't organize, and that's a form of fascism itself. The government can do anything and you can't organize against it. You have to just sit down and lay over and get along to just go along with the horrible things that the United States government does.
There's a couple points I want to add to that as well. The first point is what this reminded me of. I mean, I'm not sure if you remember this, but about a decade ago, they recently added um, the black radical, I think it's like black ideological extremist as a new form of terrorism. I remember seeing a Vice video about a black man being arrested in jail for that exact reason, or being watched in Dallas because of the black identity. There it is, the black identity extremist label. Um, and I want to go into this next point actually, to go into specifically with Charlie Kirk. So further, this ideology that paints legitimate government authority and traditional conservative viewpoints as fascist, put it in quotes, connects to different events. Can you go back up just a little bit? Um, they talk about carvings on the bullet casing of Charlie Kirk's assassin's bullets. Talk about, hey, fascist, Bella Ciao. And literally, they're using an anti-fascist an anthem to justify its own form of state repression. They talk about how the July 4th, 2025 ambush on ICE agents was carried out by anti-fascist groups. They talk about anti-fascists violently riot onto UC Berkeley's campus in 2017. ICE agents are regularly doxxed by anti-fascists, and calls to dox ICE agents appear in the same sentence of opinion pieces called the Trump administration fascist. Calling the Trump administration fascist, excuse me. It said, thus, violence against what extremists claim to be fascist is the clarion call for recent domestic terrorism. They're literally calling for physical repression on groups that are opposed to ICE or are doing what they're supposed to do, and revealing who these because I also don't like how YouTube doesn't like, let's say, the M word. So unalivers and kidnappers are actually doing. Would you not want to know if people in your communities are actively being kidnapped by a state Gestapo? They're probably gonna have something to Gestapo in this thing, maybe too. So you got another vocabulary they'll have. Um, they're talking about their following positions of law, about assaulting, resisting, or impeding federal officers. So again, any attempt to actively keep someone else safe from a hostile force, on the hostile police departments and ICE, which are interconnected, is seen as its own unique act of deserving of the domestic terrorist label. Public disclosing personal information, talking about major fraud against the U.S., obstruction of the judicial agency proceedings, money laundering, murder for hire, providing material support for terrorist activity. That bottom one's actually really fascinating to me. Providing material support for terrorist activity. So any group that has an anti-capitalist, an anti-Zionist, an anti-U.S. imperialist clause. So either one of our orgs, quite literally, whether it's the APSP or the Black Alliance for Peace, if you donate money to these organizations, it can be a call for domestic terrorist activity and to have the feds at your door away. So this simple act of just supporting, not only do they want to take out the actual like organizers and the rebels, but anybody who would actively support these things and preventing folks to even think about monetarily supporting these groups. I think about how in the book Black Against Empire, one of the interestingly enough, one of the groups of people that actively helped fund the Panthers was a black bourgeoisie because they saw the free breakfast programs and they were like, hey, they're actually feeding the community. Let's send some money in so they can buy all the necessities that they need. Let's give them money for books and things of this nature. So like they were not only revolting against the U.S. empire, but they even had some bourgeois black folks and even some celebrities realized what they were doing is actually changing lives. So they started sending them money. So it's quite fascinating. You can see how the empire, going back to our earlier points regarding how to organize within the state surveillance system, with a constant surveillance by the empire in the 2020s as compared to the 60s, they're going as far as to see who you give your money to. Like they'll it's like they're gonna, even if it's party who, by the way, isn't necessarily radical at all. It's the farthest thing from radical. But if they see your money pitching, you're pitching money, donating money into a certain candidate, they can probably just list that as, oh, you want to send it to insert progressive here? Then yeah, you are congratulations, you're a domestic terrorist. We're coming after you. To go further into the article, when it says identifying domestic terrorist organizations, they talk about in the course of and as a result of the investigations directed by NSPM 7, the FBI, in coordination with its partners, and consistent with applicable law, shall compile a list of group entities. Just to kind of pause and just say that law at this point, laws aren't going to aren't mattering as much. The empire is actively breaking its own laws. It's been doing that since its inception. We can go back to COINTELPRO, where it actively went against its own laws and policies just to spy on, to threaten, to kill, to jail black radical activists. From the Panthers, Dr. King, Malcolm X, to indigenous American movements or any other left or any of those movements, they are willing to go against their own policies, their own codes of conduct, just to make sure that the status quo of the United States doesn't change. If we can go back to the paragraph to the earlier page, how it talks about they'll compile a list of group of entities, going back to what I was saying, compile a list of group of entities are engaged in acts that may constitute domestic terrorism as defined by 18 U.S.C. 233.15, and provided the list of Deputy Attorney General. The FBI and its partners must adopt strategies similar to those used to address violent crime and organized crime to disrupt and dismantle entire networks of so-called criminal activity. Y'all, when they say that they need us to organize, This isn't just a catch-all term. This isn't just a cool sticker that you can add to your laptop, your water bottle, your briefcase. It is quite literally because they are actively and continuously organizing against us and are doing whatever means necessary to curtail our movements. I can let Marion continue on with the rest of the point.
And another thing is, I mean, Donovan was kind of already touching on this, but all of these points, this is the problem is when you're trying to define what some of these things mean, it's extremely, extremely, extremely subjective. For example, like we were talking about the different things that are, supporting a terrorist organization. And I think about like when I was saying different kinds of organizing, there are days where my kind of organizing for the Uhuru movement is handing out flyers. I could be handing out flyers and people think I'm a damn terrorist because I'm handing out flyers that say solidarity with the Uhuru 3. Or I have, I'm a terrorist for organizing an event for African women and to talk about issues within African centered communities. Some of these things are insane. And another thing I want to share um, was, and I guess Donovan, you might want to spearhead this again. Another thing we wanted to talk about was ICE, and a few things you should know about ICE. So we don't have to go into this all night. And in fact we're not going to stay on. We might be off next 10-15 minutes, but this is a few things to know. It says roughly 40,000 people as of January 2025 were being held in immigration detention. By the end of December, that number had risen by almost 75%, with more than 68,000 people held in immigration detention across the United States, in the system reportedly capable of holding 70,000 people on any given day. Now, one thing I wanted to bring up um, is that, when we talk about with Black people, because I know Black people are saying this isn't our fight, I think, like I said, all of these terms are extremely subjective. Illegal, like when you think of illegal, what does that particularly mean, right? People are thinking people who came over to the country, but we've seen videos recently of ICE harassing Black people who are, American people who their family has been here for since the 18 or 1700s. It's so easy to grab people to say you're illegal and throw them, anywhere. And I think about stuff like that a lot. They can grab people like me, for example. Ramadan is coming up, and sometimes during Ramadan, I cover my head and I think as I walk through Philadelphia, as a young Black Muslim woman, if I might be in a hijab, who's to say I'm not a Somali? Who's to say? Like I have like what could be the name of like, I'm very sure there's a Somali woman out there whose name is Maryam Muhammad, and so who's to say that ICE wouldn't come and harass me? You think about the idea of identity is very, very fickle and very, very ever changing because it is subjective. You can what is elite, what is legal today might not be legal tomorrow. Who's indigenous today might not be indigenous tomorrow. Who is white today might not be white tomorrow, because white people were supposed to be, on paper, the beneficiaries of these things in society. And now the whiteness is not necessarily affording them some of these things. Some of them there is, but like ICE is killing white civilians too now. But in like I said, like we said to be in the streams, it sucks that this is what had to happen for people to pay attention. But now people have understood that, or at least starting to understand that the violence is 360. It's not just a one-off thing. The violence can happen to any point, to anyone at any point, any time, because that's how empires work.
I will also just add that what white folks, what a lot of bourgeois white folks are starting to see within the past few weeks, maybe even a month, is that something that black folks have been talking about for decades, is that the rights that the empire gives are temporary. They are bandages to not scrape, not just scratches, but deep wounds. Malcolm talks about in the same video that he talks about chickens coming home to roost. He also talks about how you can't put a band-aid on a deep wound. You have to actively take the time to heal it from the ground up. And what America is constantly doing is consistently putting a bandage or a light remedy over deep systemic wounds within not just the empire but also the land that the empire finds itself in. Like folks have been talking about for decades. What exactly is legal on stolen land? It's been stolen for over 400 years. Are we surprised that the same folks who want to uphold an empire that actively stole indigenous land and committed a genocide to indigenous people throughout the Americas is also trying to curtail its own laws and codes of conduct and training, because now training's becoming the big thing within the empires, that we have to train the agents to be better, not the fact that they're going to have a not the fact that we're going to give them a budget that's greater than most countries' GDPs, or the fact that they're actively targeting full on so-called US civilians and their children, mind you, as justifications to go after parents. There's nothing surprising about an illegal nation that is actively committing these kinds of acts.
The other thing that I had in my list of notes for tonight, and that I was going to mention, like I said in the original public service announcement video that I was going to make for the magazine, was that I I am so concerned for the crowd that every single thing that happens that is atrocious, that is a tragedy, that is indecent, becomes a way for them to, well, if you had voted for the donkeys instead of the elephants, everything would be so much better. Not no one We would be in such a great condition if Kamala just got in the office, if we had just gotten the donkeys in office, if we had just voted blue, if we had just made everything blue, none of this would have happened. And frankly, people have been saying, stop bringing up the Democrats. They're not in office. What are you gonna stop and really understand that there is no real two-party system in the United States. It's a one-party system. You accuse China of being a one-party system. You accuse Iran and Russia and a lot of these other places around the world, the DPRK, Vietnam. You accuse all these places of being a one-party system. I don't see anything. The Uhuru Three was rated under a Democrat. Obama was in office when that not Obama, Biden was in office. A Democrat was in office when the Uhuru Three got raided, when Philando Castile got killed, when Mike Brown got killed, when Trayvon Martin got killed. Obama or some form of a Democrat was in office when a lot of these people got killed, when a lot of things have happened. So can we please stop thinking that we can vote our way out of fascism? And in fact, Hitler won the election in Germany in the 1930s. And in fact, the 1930s and 1940s in Germany was based on Jim Crow, was what inspired the Nazi Party. White nationalism in the United States is what inspired the Nazi Party. So for people to really sit here and tell themselves that the donkeys instead of the elephants was the primary reason, I mean the us choosing the not choosing the donkeys over the elephants is the primary reason all this is happening. I really need people to wake up and realize, honestly, that's bullshit. Like, that's bullshit, bro. Like, we need to stop pretending that, like, y'all want a more moderate, uh you guys want what's the word, you guys want a more covert form of fascism as opposed to an overt form of fascism. But either way, it's fascism, and I'm sick of people pretending like it's not fascism.
It's kind of like one of the online memes that I've seen where you'll have a picture of one president of the Republican Party having bombs, but the bombs don't hide themselves. They're just straight up just bombs. But then you have a Democratic elect for president, it's bombs with like a Black Lives Matter or an LGBTQ plus flag or any signifier of these marginalized groups. Just giving is just as long as we can all we can make it seem like that we are diverse and equitable and inclusive in who we attack and who we allow to attack others, then everything is so sweet. And that's the problem. And it ties into what you were talking about earlier, the problem with the need for a Democrat to be in office. Oh, if the black imperialist was in office, then none of this would have happened. It happened under Obama. Obama bombed his own people. He bombed black folks, folks of African descent, Africans. He bombed them in Libya, preventing them from being able to self-determine. And then that's just swiped under the rug because we had a black person do it. It's the same thing could be centered within a lot of the black capitalists who support many of these laws and of these bills because there's another black capitalist or black excellence for I don't want to say provocateur, but you kind of get where I'm getting at. Black excellence personified in office. As long as they as this clean cut, articulate, easy to talk to, easy to support black person attacks the radicals and not the not good, not so good black people. The black people who are getting support from the Russians or whomever threat we need to connect them to. It's this gradualism that has been happening for decades now. They told us to wait for things to get better after Bush got elected. Mind you, we were kids around this time, but they talked about this when Bush got elected. Then when Obama decided to do either respectability jig or to be silent on current in the United States and the radical action needed to solve these problems, it was like, oh, okay, but after Obama, we can get a another more progressive who will be more open to having these critical conversations and to calling out the police brutality. And then what happened after his 8 years? Trump comes in, and then they tell us again, oh, you just have to wait 4 years and things will be okay. And then Biden comes in, and then Biden does the exact same things that you told us he wasn't going to do. And then the next thing you want to say is that, but let's just wait till the next candidate. Or there's gotta be an explanation to this, just you find any sort of excuse, and it's tiring. It's an alley oop level of political basketball where you'll have Democrats actively create the laws, the infrastructure, whether it's funding the police, sending money to ICE, boosting the defense budget, actively cutting off on programs for black folks, or actively capitalizing on black opportunity. They'll do all the infrastructure, and then the Republicans will just slam it home. And we focus more on the person scoring instead of the person who actively gave them the ability to score, i.e., to enact these unjust acts, the ones that we've been talking about for the past month, into fruition. We're focused more on the person doing it than the person who wants to do it to begin with. Just like how we focus on things, or just on these issues through a face value lens, and not focus on the structures that actively lead to these issues to existing. Because if you focus on the structures, then you have to focus on the entire system. And the system is deemed as corrupt, or the system is deemed as working just as planned and needs to be dismantled, then dismantled, they'll be less likely to actively do the acts. It's I know for me personally, I'm tired of hearing these narratives. I'm tired of waiting. If any of the things that they talked about, any of these acts, if any of the waiting actually led to liberation, we wouldn't have to have had an Eonta magazine to begin with. We wouldn't have to have an alternative perspective an alternative media source, or the many alternative media sources, the Black Power medias, the Black Liberation medias, the Dr. Jared Balls, the Shabazz, the even the video essayists, the Pill Boys, the FB Signifiers, the T Noirs. There wouldn't have to have been an entire ecosystem, folks having to correct the narrative and have to cure folks of decades of propaganda to exist had we just waited. We are in this reality because we waited. We're in this reality because we're still planning to wait for our liberation instead of organize to our liberation.
And here's my thing. I'll say, as someone who identifies as a socialist and an organizer and someone who tries to do things, I wish that I was wrong sometimes. I wish that a vote sometimes would fix this shit. I sincerely do. If there was a way that I could write any name on the ballot and everything could be fixed, I would have been the first person to sign up to do it. I don't like seeing our brothers and sisters get killed in the street. I don't like seeing us bomb countries full of innocent civilians. I don't like I don't like us giving funding to a literal genocidal apartheid state, an ethno-nationalist, white nationalist state full of pedophiles. I don't like that. I don't like any of these things. And I wish in my hardest of hearts that our nation, well, I mean, let me not say our nation, because this is we an eternal colony, but that the nation of America, the United States, whatever you want to call it, to be honest, I wish that a check on a ballot box was for a donkey candidate, perhaps, was the super fix for everything. But if that was the voting act of the some of the civil rights and voting acts would have fixed everything by now, but they haven't. And so unfortunately, because of how bad everything is, the only way to get through things is to organize your communities, is to go out there and unfortunately do some of the things. And I'm not going to say, because some of the actions we need to do, like I said, I literally can't talk to say that out here, because you will never see me or Doniven and Randy Jansa staff ever again if they crack down on this stuff. But some of the things we need to be doing, unfortunately, are far, far, far more bigger than just sitting there and clicking off a certain ballot on a box. And I do wish it was that simple, but unfortunately, it's not. It's not. But that's what we were going to end for the night, and that's really what I wanted to say. And if Doniven, you had any final comments, but that's what I really wanted to get at. Unfortunately, a donkey candidate is not going to save the world.
You can be blunt and just say, unfortunately, an ass candidate is not going to save the world. Um, but I think I want to start off by saying the last thing I want to say is that um, I empathize. I'm gonna be blunt. I'm gonna say something controversial. I know folks say, "Oh my God, he's gonna say something. Oh, he's gonna say something offensive or something like that." But I'm just gonna just say something honest. I empathize with the person who doesn't vote. The more I continue to live within the U.S. empire, the more I empathize with people who have given up on the U.S. political process. Now, I'm not saying that we should live in the doomerism. Obviously, that was against everything that we're standing for, against radical organizing, because you have to have a revolutionary optimism to even deal with the empire on a conscience. But I empathize with those people because at least they set a hard boundary and they were willing to follow through. Especially especially at the very least since October 7th, when studies have shown that the fact that your ass candidate didn't support at the very least, taking away arms from the Zionist settler colonial states. The fact that there are studies that have shown that lack of support of a ceasefire, that not support for a ceasefire, had significant impacts amongst many of her voting population, and yet to this day, y'all will still whenever there is an instance of the empire committing another atrocity, recently being what's happening with ICE in Minneapolis, you will still say, oh, if only we had so and so in office. People had a hard line and they were not going to cross it. I'm I'm at least optimistic in that we're at a point where where we can set these kinds of red lines and there actually seems to be some blowback. Now, whether or not the so-called left wing of the same eagle wants to learn from those things or not, that's a whole nother story. And I know for a fact I'm not necessarily trusting their ability to learn. Even its most progressive candidates will find an excuse to uphold imperialism. I don't expect any U.S. politician to fight for the liberation of Black people, African people, new African people. I expect the Black new African people to be the ones fighting for our liberation. And before we go, I also because this was such a quick last minute emergency broadcast, I want to I know Maryam will be wanting to do this as well, but I want to shout out our graphic designers who took the little bit of time that they had to not only update our fonts to send in this last minute requests of a live stream that you see on Instagram and our Twitters, but who have actively taken up the task to create the beautiful art that you see in Ianso. So Anaya, Carla, I'm not sure if you're in video, but whenever you get this is us showing our love. Shouts out to y'all. Definitely make Ianso what it is, and y'all continue to. I mean, heck, if y'all see the new logo, that is from our graphic design team. The red, black, and green that you see on a lot of our stuff nowadays. That's from our graphic design team who take the time to give us some quality stuff because we know y'all love the designs that you see. And these two women take the time out of the day to do this stuff. So I want to shout out to them before we actually have to close the live stream.
Yeah, oh my God. See, look, it's Carla right there. But seriously, like we've been doing like so much. And we wanted to take our time to really talk about some serious issues. But no, thank you so much to Carla and Anaya. You guys have been saving us so much time. And when we do these emergency live streams, we don't take it for granted that like the turnaround time has to be quick and that, we're doing these the day of because something crazy has happened. But here's how I want to exit. I don't know if you guys saw how dope our new intro is. What I did was I was supposed to use that for something else. I reworked it. And then with some of the new aesthetics that Anaya had shown me, I just tried to take her lead from it. So what I'll do is Doniven and I are gonna disappear and we're going to intro our way out because that's what I'm in the mood to do. So what I'll say is peace, but also freedom in our lifetime, and of course, relentless.
But America should keep her mouth shut. Wherever there's a corrupt regime, as much hell as America has raised on the earth.
I've decided to surrender to the will of Allah.
Say what?
I've become a Muslim. I don't know how to thank you for sending me to D.C. I feel like I've almost become a new man.
Wait a minute, can you give me a discount on some of them bean pies?
I mean that shit, because these white folks see us as snubs. I don't care what y'all think. I don't care if you think you a lawyer, if you a man, if you an African American, if you whatever the fuck you think you are. Get down to niggas to these motherfuckers.
I have been on a research. Music is psychology. See? And if the music does not penetrate the heart, the soul, and the mind, and the body, then you ain't gonna feel it.
The answer is this. I call myself an African person because our people originated in Africa. So when you find African people in Jamaica, in Haiti, in Latin America, in Brazil, in various places in the world, they're still African people, even though they were born in that place. And I'm very proud of the fact that I am an African person.
I gotta say that even in the midst of all this capitalist excess, this disgusting display of conspicuous consumption, this exercise in bougie exhibitionism, it's beautiful.
So, brother, where your poems at? Huh? How you gonna call yourself a revolutionary